All right, so this week we're moving into probability, into a whole new land. It's very mathy and not quite as statsy as the last section, right? In the last section, there was a lot more thinking about how these things might have come to be, or what the potential biases are, or how we collected data or how to display data. In probability, it's a lot mathier. There are formulas that we can fall back onto and notation that we can use if we want to. So for a lot of students, this is a better section for them, especially students who are strong math students, but maybe aren't the best at, reading comprehension, so to speak. There's definitely still going to be giant word problems because that's how stats is, but those word problems can be broken down like they were back in an algebra class. So if you didn't do so hot on exam one and you feel comfortable with what I just said, you're probably in good shape. You can make up a lot of ground on exam two. I always like to think of each exam separately as how much did I lose. So I just want to take a moment. If you did well on exam one, you can just stop the video and go to the next one. If you didn't do so hot on exam one, let me talk to you a little bit about what you should be doing moving forward and how much that exam could have theoretically hurt your grade. So the way I like to think of it is that each exam is worth 17% of your grade, approximately. It's 16.666666 repeating, right? But it's worth 17% of your grade. So there was a unfortunate number of students who scored in the 30s. I'm going to just say, let's say I scored a 40 on exam one. That means that I missed out on 60 points of that 17%, right? So if you scored a 40, that means there's 60 points that you left on the table that you should have gotten, right? So we then need to figure out what 60% of 17% of 60 is. We can figure out how many of those points we left behind. I don't know why I have like 1,000 calculators open. So let's see, 0.17 times 60. You lost out on 10 points. And that's of your overall grade. So at this point, if you scored a 40 on the first exam, then you can't possibly get an A in the course, theoretically, right? This would mean the highest possible score, if you did 100% on everything else, is now whatever's the leftover, an 89.8. But this points out that even if you scored in the 30s, you're still in shape where you can pass the class, right? 17% of your grade is not that big of a part of your grade that we can't overcome it. However, if you scored 40 on this exam, what I have found in the past is it's usually indicative of how you're going to do on the next exams, right? Unless you make some big changes. So it's definitely still possible to do well, even with a low first exam score. And this 10.2 points lost also assumes, again, that you don't take the optional final and improve your grade. Again, I've found that students who tend to average 40s on exams get a 40 on the optional final, and it's not that big of a help. But if you just have one exam where you did not figure out how to study well, and then you bring it back up with the rest of the exams, that optional final is then a useful thing. So what do we mean by study well? Because you need to make some life changes, right? to do well in this course. One, watch all the videos, right? I think for a lot of students, the ones who didn't do so hot, I know these are also the students that when I walked around class, they still didn't have lecture notes. When we were working on our worksheets, these are the students that didn't have lecture notes in front of them, clearly hadn't watched lecture notes, had no notes to go back to. So when I said, and even there were some students that when we were doing, like, say, the box plot worksheet, I was like, well, where's the box plot we just did? It's the exact same work. They hadn't even written that down. So we need to watch the videos and take notes. That's number one. Now, some of you probably did that and still didn't do so hot. Well, that's because for any type of learning, you have to be the one doing something to really learn. And so watching the videos themselves is great, but it's very passive, right? It's not active. So you need to try problems, which is what I try to have you do in class. But that's just one problem, maybe two. It's not all the problems from a particular part of the notes, right? We only have an hour and a half. So you need to be doing the practice problems at the end of the lecture notes. You got to be doing something to practice. Taking those knowledge checks in a serious fashion where you take it the first time and then you figure out what the heck you did wrong and understand your mistakes. Those knowledge checks are really a look into what I think is important. So you got to try problems. And then obviously with the sample exams, same sort of business. You got to be doing them on your own. Having another student explain something to you is great once, but then you need to figure it out for yourself, right? What I find from a lot of students is they smile and nod and they think they're getting something. And then when it comes time for them to actually do it, they can't because they've never taken the training wheels off and tried the problems on their own. So those are some of my suggestions. Other suggestions would be making sure you're going to these sessions after class, right? 1 to 2 every Friday. I'll hang out in class till 1. So if you wanted to work with me until 1 o'clock, you can ask questions, finish up your worksheet, and then go to V's session. Try moving where you are in the class. I know that that's always annoying for the people who kind of gotten their seat situated. But I find that students who sit near their friends, they tend to have sort of a dynamic with their friends that is maybe not the most helpful, right? You have the one friend who sort of does the worksheet and you maybe are the one who's just copying off them, or they're not the best at explaining. You need to mix it up and try to sitting with someone else who might do a better job of explaining the material to you than your friend does. So if you're not doing so hot and your friend's doing really well, that's maybe an indication that you need to consider a different place to sit or another person to work with, which those study sessions are really good for. And if both you and your friend are struggling, definitely consider splitting up and moving and sitting next to somebody who might be able to help you out. So come hang out with me, chat with me about what went wrong on your tests. For the most part, it looked like students just didn't study the material I asked. There was a lot of blank stuff. There was nothing about z-scores. A lot of people left the z-score problems blank or the regression problems blank. There were a lot of basic mistakes on the box plots. So in general, it just seemed like we didn't take the time to practice these things and make sure that we had them down before the test.